halfway to the Carolinas, so we span the country. We're very proud of ourselves. Thank you all. So I hope you had a good rest last night, had a chance to just process perhaps some of the things that we were sharing. We will have a few announcements toward the end of how we hope to stay in contact as you wish. But for now, we just want to welcome you. Let's take a deep breath and just once again, join our energies together for our sacred time today. So as you wish, just lower your eyes, close your eyes. Let's breathe together. A nice deep breath with the intention that we are coming into sacred circle, sacred time, to learn, to grow, and offer service, intention, and higher understanding to ourselves and our planet. We are so grateful to be here, and we are eager to learn and to grow together. And so it is. Take another deep breath. And we are here. It's so good to see everyone today. Thank you. So Jan is raring to go. And we're going to just turn it over to her. So good afternoon, Jan. Welcome. We look forward to sharing with you today.
Wonderful. Isn't it amazing, just the short time that we were together yesterday, and I just feel like I'm looking at old friends here. This is really a fun part of when people are intentionally wanting to connect, how relatively easy it is. So I'm grateful each one of you are here. Yesterday, we focused more on the idea of being present, being here, and the gifts that come from that. And that includes some self-assessment. Who is the me that is here? What are some of my own biases, experiences that might get in the way, experiences that help to encourage the healing in that moment? And today is more about motion, the motion and emotion of grief, the motion and change of the dying process, and then the motion moving forward of what is next for each of you. What are the next steps? So those are basically the 3 hours of today: grief, the dying process, and what's next moving forward. So just as a very quick recap of what we did yesterday, there were at least 7 things, I would say, that we did together that you can take from here and use in any way you want. One of them was the idea of creating a caring, healing environment wherever you are. I joked about being in this little bit dingy basement here and doing a few things to make it a sacred place. And just as Marcia led us in that, bringing ourselves here into this intentional sacred space, we together co-created this community of like-minded people who were drawn to serve in new ways, in care at the end of life and conversations at the end of life. We reviewed what is evolving and transforming in end-of-life care in our culture right now, which includes being with what is around the realities of COVID and how that's changing so much for how we care for each other. We practiced mindful, compassionate presence and deep listening. We asked open questions that explored what matters most to us in the end of our life. We experienced the goodbye to hands practice, which can be done in a whole variety of ways with yourself and others. And then in the time from the end of our session until today, Hopefully you reflected on what you've learned from grief and loss in your own lives, because that kind of reflection and assessment is so important to know what are our assumptions and ideas and values and beliefs, and how are they created, and how are they serving us, and what is not serving us, that we can become aware of and let go of in order to be more of a healing instrument in this time at end of life. So I would say those are the sort of basic 7 things that we did together that can be carried forward. And in fact, much of that you probably had been doing some version of it long before yesterday, but just to name those things. So I wanted us to take a few moments before we open up a conversation about our experiences with grief and loss. But before we do that, I want to see if there were any questions from yesterday or any comment that is that you would like to say before we move into the next part. Any questions or clarifications or reflection?
Hey there, it's Tracy. That actually, is there a handout or something share with me an email or?
Say more about that, Tracy. What is it that you're looking for?
The hand exercise you walked us through yesterday. Is there do you have it written down somewhere?
I do have it written down, and that is something that I can share. There are many versions of it, and so I would encourage you all to make it your own. But I can share more or less what I said. I often go quote off script, but I can share a kind of basic script.
That would be awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
I actually did the exercise again last night, so it was
That's
really
cool.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, just as an addition, it's also can be really quite something to do that with feet.
Yeah,
Touching
I bet.
feet, holding feet, massaging your feet, and just imagining from the time you were a baby with those little precious, tender little feet that didn't yet know how to walk on the earth, all the way through childhood and teenage years where those feet took you, and you can go all the way up into your current life. But that, I find that also quite powerful, the idea of where these feet have walked me. Just
Great idea. Thank you.
For that matter, you can do the whole body, and in our death doula program, we do a goodbye to the body. And here's, if you want like the advanced level, if any of you are interested in that, hands, feet, I would say the advanced level, which I think takes courage and is quite something, is to get yourself some private space with a mirror where you can see your whole body and take off your clothes. And from your feet all the way up to your head, look at and love and remember and say goodbye to each part of your body. It's quite an experience of what, I won't say what it is because it'll be whatever it is to you, but I would really encourage you. I'd say that's kind of the advanced one. Just looking at ourselves naked is already a practice that's practice of vulnerability and sometimes insight. Anything else? Okay, well, let's follow that thread that you may have reflected on, which was the question, what have your experiences with grief and loss taught you about grief? And I'd like to encourage, if you're comfortable sharing an insight from that, I would encourage each of us to we talk about speaking essentially. Some of these things that we could talk about for a long time, there's a practice called essential speaking, where you say in a minute the most important thing that you want to share. And so I would encourage any and all of us to share in the next 20 minutes something from that reflection on grief and loss and what it's taught you about grief. And if we can keep it to 1 minute, then you get to choose intentionally what in that 1 minute you most want to say about that, knowing it could be a longer conversation. But I'd love to hear from any of you who would like to share something that you have learned from those experiences, learned about grief.
I'll share the pain of the death in the heart has driven me to question deeply what life is about. I know it balances in my head, but then to work through the emotion and connect my mind with my heart and my whole body to a level of acceptance. That grief has presented a real drive and push for me to understand a deeper level of life, because we're all going to die, and that's a knowledge. Even animals, I'll just cry and bawl watching a movie. So for me, the wisdom of it comes from feeling the pain, and then how I manage that pain is to explore at more deeper levels, a deeper level of acceptance by letting go, releasing to a higher intelligence, to my spirits, my light family, all that stuff. So that's what it teaches me, a much deeper insight into the wholeness of life.
Thank you, Barbara.
I'd like to say something.
Yeah, Einar and then Melinda.
When my mother died in '05, I was quite pleasantly surprised to find that I experienced mostly her joy at going home at that point, because she'd been ill for quite a while and she was ready to go. And so we both experienced joy during that transition. So that was a pleasant surprise for me. It's not what I expected at all.
Thank you, Einar. Melinda.
So I need to kind of share a current loss, which was of a very dear friendship. And I identified, that grief absolutely for me, was the heart center and the heart chakra. And there were days where it was, okay, and other days where it was pretty challenging. But what came out of it was, we need to do self-care. And I identified a self-care technique, which I started on myself. I've done it on clients, but it's called a core star healing. And the core star is located about up here. It's how we shine our light to the world. And I had to remember to shine my light, even though I was in that grief. And so it's you can't really shine your light at the same time and hold the grief. So it was a wonderful exercise to remind me that I can still shine my light, even though my heart's pretty broken.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I found it surprising in 2009, and again now, that I feel more alive right after a loss than in life in general, every sense heightened. And so I'm really curious about that this time around, to kind of pay attention a little more. And the second part of that is that I have met my most fierce and ferocious self in grief, and unexpectedly a few times, which is really uncomfortable. But that part is also alive, and I'm curious about that and where that comes from. Could be around acceptance, but it feels like more.
Thank you, Mary Beth.
May I speak?
Please, Marcia.
I feel like I'm holding the whole emotion of anger with a different understanding. We know that anger is part of the steps of grief, I guess, but when I look at myself, when I get angry, or I'm working with clients, or I look at the world, there's a lot of anger, and I find that it's helpful to hold all this anger as a grief process. We are all in somehow, that we are experiencing loss, that we are experiencing sadness, that we are disappointed with how life has unfolded. All of that has to do with our grief and our adaptation to the changes. So I'm looking at anger in this new way. And for example, if someone comes into therapy and they're really angry, doesn't take long before we go down into it, and there is a loss, there is a grief, there is a sadness. So anger, as we know, it can often be a secondary emotion. And just this whole conversation on grief, I think we get to honor the anger and hold it, not as something to get rid of, but something to utilize and understand.
To explore what's under it. Yeah, thank you.
Can you guys hear me? I have a few things to say
Yes,
I
please,
can.
Amy.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
I just kind of wrote down some ideas. The ultimate release, precious mystery, powerful sadness. I put forced, and then I put forced reconciliation, and then the awe of life.
Amy, can you read those again?
Sure. Can you not hear me?
No, I hear you well. I just, they're so potent, each one. I just wanted to hear them again.
Okay.
I hear you well.
Okay. The ultimate release, precious mystery, powerful sadness, very powerful sadness, forced, I put forced by itself, and then I put forced reconciliation, and then the awe of life.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cindy, you're muted.
I have three parts that I will share. My first experience, I was, I don't know, 16, and a boyfriend was killed in a car wreck. And I was devastated, but my parents got help for me. So I found out there is help. My second experience was with my mother dying, and I found that I would be driving down the road for years afterwards and just start crying with the grief. Our last experience was when my husband's parents died, and we cleaned out the farm, and he grieves completely different than I do. And I found out that people have very different ways of grieving.
I am so appreciating everything all of you are saying. I feel like this could be a masterclass in grief that each one of you are contributing to. Thank you, Cindy. Yeah.
So,
Red Dove, and then Hannah, you can go next.
okay. The thing that came up to me, because this is something I've kind of sat with my whole life, so it's not a new reflection. So right away, the first thing that came to my mind is the word capacity. And throughout my life, every time I felt something that I needed to grieve over, or that I am grieving over, I felt like our culture and society doesn't have a vast expansive enough container to allow us to let go, like maybe primally, just completely lose your shit in any way you need to do that. It could be scary to people. So we have to shrink ourselves, and that's not a way to really grieve when we have to compartmentalize and shrink it to fit society. So I just felt like the word capacity came up, that's what worked for me, is finding people who are open to let grief happen in any way, shape, or form, in any time, in any place, and hold you and create a safe space. So I know I can't be the only one that feels like this. So I'm not interested in like getting into the politics of like Western medicine and death and dying. My mind doesn't think that way. My heart doesn't feel that way, but I'm more interested in helping create that space for myself and others, a safe space to grieve. And more, like you said, what we're doing is going back to the old ways, because what we've been doing isn't working. So going back to how traditional culture, the whole community came and helped grieve. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Red Dove. Thank you so much for naming that. Hannah, think you were you heading towards your
Yeah.
mute button?
Here we go. I was kind of reflecting over different times of loss in my life, you know. And what I kept coming back to is the different ways of loss and the different kinds of grief, like grieving the small things too, like that the aging process is grieving, and that having health challenges. You know, I had a stroke a few years ago that severely limited my ability to do things. There was a lot of like daily mourning the loss of certain things, and then also celebrating things in the recovery process. But it's just, yeah, I'm not sure exactly what I want to say about it, but I think there's something about like the end of each day being a little end of a cycle, some grief there, the end of each year going into the darkest part of the year, feeling that like letting go and wrapping up a cycle, like that if I recognize the smaller things, then maybe it increases my capacity for the bigger things to grieve. Like I hope this isn't past a minute. I had a raccoon get one of my chickens earlier this summer, and I had a full-on chicken funeral, and I invited all the other chickens, and we said some words, and we had a burial, and I was like, we are doing this. Because it was traumatic to all of us. I think one of them still has PTSD from the raccoon attack, but like we're getting through it, you know. And I know that it's like a source of like hilarity in a way, because it was so funny to like try to invite chickens to a funeral, but I had to bribe them with treats, you know. But just something about that, when I can create a ceremony around things and recognize it, I feel a big shift for me. That creating ceremony, creating like recognizing the cycles. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you again for giving voice to the many daily, monthly, yearly losses. Yeah, Angelina.
To just feeling everybody's shares and how that felt with me as I was hearing, I just feel like on top of that, the as you were just saying, Hannah, the cycles, I wanted to kind of talk about with my own experience of dealing with grief, and that tremendous heartbreak sensation of like that excruciating pain in the heart space, and how I've always felt it helpful to just tune into one breath cycle at a time and just feel the exhale and feel the inhale and, you know, zoom in. But I liked how many cycles you were talking about, because there are so many opportunities to learn that and experience that. And I think collectively right now, there's this feeling in our whole society, around the whole planet, of a grief of the way life was, and we're all finding we're needing to create new ceremonies and rituals to honor like the privilege of being able to go out to a busy restaurant with our friends and have dinner. Something that for me, that's one of the things I miss the most of what was, and now we don't know what we're going into. But just that there's a grief process now too, which is so interesting. And some people call that ego death, you know, like as we knew ourselves and as we've known the collective behaviors, we're in that time too. And I think it's so important that we use these tools to honor the acknowledgement of something has shifted. We don't know what's coming, but the more we grieve together and work together in that acknowledgement, Red Dove, as you said, that capacity for really taking that time to expand on that, it will help us all collectively go forward in maybe a more healthy way. Yeah. But thank you everybody for just helping me put that together. I didn't know how to say it all.
Yeah, Roger.
Well, I was going to say, what I learned about grief, you know, what I've learned about grief and the loss of my identity when I left parish ministry, which is what I had prepared for, and had to move to chaplaincy, or got to move to chaplaincy. I found that in the midst of my grieving and rebuilding and recreating, that there was this phrase that helped me as like kind of a mantra. It was like, at the heart of all creation, there's this purposeful goodness, and from which we come, and which we live our fullest, to which we shall at last return. And that phrase saved me in many ways. It just helped me so much. And I learned that having a little mantra is helpful as I grieved that.
Roger, could you repeat that phrase again?
Can you feed her? At the heart, my dog is saying hi.
I know. Your dog is clearly engaged in this conversation.
Absolutely. As soon as I started talking about, you know, the dog came. It's interesting. Dogs know. At the heart of this was a 400-page book, and there was one phrase that just came to me like it was written in neon, and I had read it 10 years before, and it just came to me, and it just helped me. And it's, at the heart of all creation, there is a purposeful goodness from which we come, in which we live our fullest, to which we shall at last return. And just saved me.
Boy, talk about succinct. That captures an enormous experience of human life. Thank you. I'm just loving everything you all are bringing. Amy.
Well, since I'm still in the middle of it, being in grief since March, one of the things that I've noticed is there's no such thing as time in dealing with grief. Because the worst thing I heard during this period of time is, it just takes time. It'll all heal with time. Time doesn't really exist when you're dealing with grief. You know, you may be in the middle of it today and tomorrow you're fine, but driving on Academy Boulevard, it'll trigger. And I think one of the things I got out of what all of you have been saying is cycles work much better because the intensity of the grief has changed since March. It doesn't go away, but how I perceive it does. And, you know, thinking about, oh, next year will be better just doesn't help. That's just my perspective.
Thank you, Amy. Sandra.
Yes. I thought I knew a fair amount about grief until my mother was dying. And that one taught me so much. I learned a lot from the surprises. I mean, different things kept surprising me. Like I wouldn't be able to function doing something that seemed ordinary to me. And there was no way to push through that. That certainly taught me to accept that in others. I had some weird experiences. The one that most comes to mind right now is the one time when I was visiting her, the house started talking to me. And I had this conversation with her house. You know, it needed comforting from me, which was so interesting. You know, and I've laughed about that so many times. Who's going to believe I talked to a house? House was talking to me. But in the moment, it was a very real experience. And it was important to allow it. So I learned to really notice those surprises and accept them in myself, which of course helped me see them and accept them in others. The biggest one, and the one that has meant the most to me long term, is the ability, I don't know the right word. We watched this movie last night called Collateral Beauty. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but it's about a couple whose daughter dies. And this old lady tells them, watch for the collateral beauty. And I thought that was such an interesting term. The fallout, you know, not the expected, not the sadness. Watch for the gifts. And that's what I learned more than anything else from my mother's death. And the biggest of those was healing my relationship with her, which I would not have thought was possible before she was getting close to dying. And it was me doing my work. You know, she didn't do a whole lot. She certainly didn't consciously try to heal her relationship with me, or at least I don't think so. But to come out of that experience, feeling that relationship healed or resonated, you know, integrated, whatever you want to call that, meant so much to me. And to learn that that's possible around the dying process has meant a lot. So thanks for that question.
Thank you. Yeah, Janaya, you want to go ahead?
Sure, I have my timer here. Can you hear me? I don't trust myself to stop it.
Yes, we
Good
hear you
morning,
well.
everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening. Good work. It's wonderful to be here. And last night, my sweetheart and I, we've been close for 14 years, and we were having this conversation about the ways that we grieve. And you know, after 14 years, I hadn't realized what a normalizer he was. We talked about the 5 Ways We Grieve by Susan Berger. And found out that he's a normalizer. I'm not a normalizer. So, you know, I really wish that we were taught different ways that people grieve so that couples can understand each other more. Because it was quite a piece to get. You know. Is everyone familiar with that book? You familiar with the book, 5 Ways We Grieve?
I haven't heard of it. It's another note I'll make to myself.
Oh, it's wonderful. I can put it in the chat by
Yeah,
Susan Berger.
That would be great. That would be
Time's
great.
up. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to share? Well, thank you for all those sharings. And I know that if we were to have a longer conversation, more things for each of you would come out that really could contribute to a beautiful piece of work out of this group of humans of what we've learned so far. And there are a lot of wonderful resources on grief that are out there. It used to be something 20 or so years ago, it was more in the clinical world, but like a lot of things, I think our conversation about grief and our increasing literacy about grief and our understanding, particularly from wisdom traditions, like Red Dove was alluding to, well, you were speaking to, not alluding to, some of the wisdom traditions that we have lost touch with are really helping us to understand the expression of grief and the sharing in community of grief. And if you were fortunate enough, I would say fortunate enough to come from a family or a culture where the expression of grief was not only allowed, it was encouraged and it was held, then I consider you fortunate. Many of us are having to learn that. And it's not easy to find places for that. So I hope people like Red Dove and others, I know that there are people who feel a special calling to supporting places, rituals, ceremonies of grief and grieving. It's something when we were in the program I teach in the Conscious Dying Institute, when we were on site, a whole afternoon was devoted to live music and creating a grief ritual that was a very powerful experience. Could feel scary, awkward, embarrassing, uncomfortable, all the things that happen when we allow our emotions collectively to be present, and really coming up against the fear, which is I think a primary fear and misconception, I would say, that many of us grew up with, that to go into the pain of grief is not safe. And if I go in, I may get stuck there and never come out. So better to just leave that alone, or to do all the things that unfortunately our North American culture has really educated us on, which is numbing, distracting, staying busy, and ignoring. So there's some wonderful, I'll after today's session, I'll send out some more resources for certain topics that I have found really helpful. And two people in particular recently that I have been really inspired by. One is a book by Francis Weller called The Wild Edge of Sorrow. And he speaks of different kinds of grief, different from the loss of a person or a thing. He speaks about things like the loss of what I had hoped would happen in life. He talks about ancestral grief, which for many of us is a new concept. So that's one. And the other, another, bringing in more an indigenous understanding and old wisdom tradition would be through someone like Martine Prechtel, who has some wonderful YouTube talks on what can happen in an intact culture when collectively we grieve together. So thinking about what each of you said, there's a quote by Jung, Carl Jung, who says, embrace your grief, for there your soul will grow. Embrace your grief, for there your soul will grow. So grief is soul work. And it's work on all levels, right? Because it affects us on all levels. And several of you spoke to that. Physically, what can happen, mentally, what happens. You know, Sandra's saying, I'm doing something I've done all the time and I'm just unable to do it. The clouding, the confusion, the waves of emotion coming and going. I'm, quote, fine today, tomorrow I'm driving on Academy Boulevard and I'm keening in my car and can hardly see where I'm going. I'm putting my words into that. I don't think Cindy said that. But it affects us physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually as well. It can be a place where people really question, where is God in this? Where is divine purpose in this kind of pain and loss? So it impacts us on all levels, and the healing and the understanding comes from each of those levels as well. So embrace your grief, for there your soul will grow. Grief is the easiest way we define it, is it's a natural response to loss. So natural is the key word for me. It's like our wanting to speak of death in a very different way, in its naturalness in the cycle of living and dying, in the naturalness of our evolution on a soul level. So many of us have grown up in cultures and families where because it was not okay to openly express, and it seemed messy and scary probably to people, there is this sense of both accumulated, so layers and layers and layers that have not moved, and congested, stuck grief. And so that permission, that different understanding that we can offer as people who are trying to bring a new way into the experience of grief, loss, dying, death, the evolution of soul, you know, those of us who are feeling called to a different understanding can do so much to help re-educate, offer a different imagination about the power and the purpose of grief. And just as we talk about the ability to be present, compassionate, open-hearted, strong back, that same quality of being is so helpful to bring to the experience of grief with other people, which means I need to do enough of my own work, my own understanding of my grief, my own layers of congested grief that haven't been moved and expressed. I need to do enough of that so that I can be with others' intense emotions, because that's the main thing that keeps us from being there, right? Because we have this natural human desire to connect and to serve. At least I think we do. It gets buried. So the ability to be with others' intense emotions, but first of all, my own, right? And to know that to go into that place of grief and grieving is a place of motion, and to help people to see that the way through is through. And it doesn't mean we get to another side and, you know, as one of you said, time just does its miracle and it's all over. It's not. It's woven into who we are. We'll never not have that grief somewhere in us, but it has been assimilated and metabolized. Some people use the word of unmetabolized and metabolized grief. And I love that because, you know, my mind often thinks that way as a nurse, you know, on the physical level. And so that really speaks to me, the idea of metabolized. It becomes part, it nourishes me. It's not just an aberration that I figured out how to live with. It actually feeds and nourishes usually the soul level, right? And my understanding, my ability to be compassionate and empathic. So we have a lot to learn from people who have not forgotten the power and the ability to grieve. And one of the things that Martine Prechtel and many other people talk about is this connection that a couple of you gave voice to. I think, Einar, you first gave voice to it, which is this idea that there is some, I don't begin to understand what the balance is, but there is this important relationship between grief and joy. And our ability to feel through grief opens up our ability to feel the joys of life. And several of you spoke maybe in different words around that same idea. It's kind of a corollary to speak about our mortality changes how we live. So instead of, it's like a 180 from the way a lot of us were raised, which is don't talk about it. And let's not talk about the fact that we're all going to die. In fact, let's deny it. So it's 180 from that. It says actually to talk about it changes how fully I'm engaged in life and the preciousness and fragility of it. I'm more in the moment when I recognize mortality. And the same seems to be in some way with grief. So rather than running from it and distracting and numbing to it, actually to enter into it, to have a relationship with, to work through it and let it metabolize and uplift my soul in some way, changes my ability to feel joy and connection to life. So this is this literacy. This is a term that you hear in parts of the end of life community, this literacy. Stephen Jenkinson talks a lot about how illiterate we are around grief. We just haven't been taught from many role models, unless you were fortunate enough to come from a place where that was talked about more easily. So I so appreciate everything that you all brought, and keep noticing and writing. Those of you who are right in the heart of recent losses, all of us in our own way, as several of you gave voice to, are experiencing losses on a regular basis. The Buddhists refer to the 10,000 losses of a lifetime, just to put a number on it. In other words, many smaller, larger, and that the more we can uncongest and move those losses in our experience of them, let whatever our process is for acknowledging and feeling the pain of that loss, that the more we can do that, I know in my own life, the more it opens up to me to the 10,000 wonders of life. And that wonderful expression, what was it? Collateral beauty, that Sandra referred to, So in some ways, that's the secret that I wish more people knew. And that is part of our service, I think, to others, is to speak of the possibilities, not just the tragedy, but the possibilities at end of life, the possibilities of engaging in grief. And I don't mean, by the way, a kind of Pollyanna look like, come on, death is a beautiful thing, and just why can't you see it? This is something that I just want to give a little warning to, that it's important as people who are serving others in this area of end of life to meet people where they are. And that doesn't mean that you lose, or any of us lose, our own understandings and our own capacities to see a much bigger picture. But to just watch any proselytizing that we might do with the enthusiasm we have from a certain belief system. I've certainly seen that in myself and see it in other people. So I name it in myself first. Meeting people where they are, offering by imagination and possibility and exploration, and holding a space for someone to see a different point of view, but not needing to impose a belief system. So honoring our own beliefs, honoring others and where they are. So I think I'll leave that there. This recording, I'm really going to enjoy going back and listening to, because of what each of you added. I really feel could be it could be a series of poems on grief. What those of you who gave word. Is there anyone who didn't say anything out loud who would like to take a moment? Yeah, Lauren, I thought you might.
Um, I've just been listening and I feel it deep in my heart. And I feel like everyone here really lives life through their heart every day. And you're going to have grief, love, joy, sadness, everything. Like I cried yesterday. Like I feel like it's kind of funny. I will be sad about something in the world and just cry and be like, talk about love. And it's like the anger, sadness, everything. And then like after I cry, your eyes and your body just feels like, oh, just let it out. Because I feel like we all hold it in, and it's like we got to just let it out and cry, because your heart is really where the love is and why we want to do this, and show the patients that we love them and they're not alone and we'll always be here for them. And even on the other side, like just that feeling. And I do, my horse is my therapy. Like he feels every part of that, and he knows like what's on the other side and knows about the spiritual part of it. So he's like my healer. I'll go to him and cry and he'll console me. And that's where I learned to let go, because at first I literally had this experience with this man passing, and he had esophagus cancer, and it was like God, Jesus, divine took over my body to take care of him, and I was not really there. And then after, I was like, what just happened? Like he was, gonna choke on his own vomit and everything. And I grabbed him and was like, it's okay, I got you. Like it wasn't, I was gonna get sick. And I was like, darn, Lauren, do not do that. And I grabbed him and like held him. And then after, I was like, I don't know what just happened. It was, and I held this in for a month, and I had hives all over my body and all over. And I finally had to cry and let it go, and the hives are gone. Like it literally, if you leave it in, it can hurt your body. So you have to just somehow release in a different way. So if you keep it in, we just gotta let it go and have people like you guys to talk about it. Because I told people what happened with my guy, and they looked at me like I was crazy. And I'm like, I just need someone to talk to me, to understand. And being in this group, we all understand each other and we all listen, and it's the heart. So
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And that's such an interesting use of inflammation. It's like physically your body was showing what an innervated, inflamed, congested system can do. And there's an emotional version of that. I mean, if you think about the inflammatory process in the body is there for a reason. And it's just like the stress response is there for a reason. It's part of our survival. And so in the moment, in an acute situation, those inflammatory immune responses, or those that stress response of a rapid heart and a higher loss of circulation to the fingers and all those things that happen when your body kind of floods you with, okay, we got to deal with this right now. We're grateful for that. Just like in the midst of acute grief, sometimes it is the best thing we can do to deny what's happening. It's like there's a place for that. But when that acute situation becomes chronic and it's happening all the time with every loss, that stress response is being enervated all the time and not just occasionally. The inflammatory process is constantly through our food, and toxins and stress and congested emotions is constantly being inflamed. Then we are really out of balance. So thank you for naming that and looking at how that truly can manifest physically.
Can I say something?
Yes, Sandra.
I've worked with feelings with myself and clients for many, many years. Our bodies know what to do with feelings. If I love to watch little kids, you know, especially like 1.5, 2-year-olds. They don't yet have any inhibition about their feelings. And when they're upset, you know, they just throw themselves all over the place and yell and scream, and it lasts for 10 seconds or whatever, and they get up and go find something to do. If we didn't store it, it would be that simple, you know? So the adult version, I think of as our tears are the overflow valve. If we're too angry, we're too sad, we're too happy, you know, we cry. And our bodies know, you know, do we need to get down on the floor and yell and scream like the toddlers, or cry into our pillows, or just completely fall apart, just surrender to it? It works the best. It really does. There are no bad feelings. There are no feelings that we'll get stuck in. The idea of getting stuck, it just means that we have a whole barrel full behind that we haven't kept up to date with. But feelings will always come, they'll increase. So that's where we get scared. And then if we stay with it, we'll go over the top and down the other side. They will always go away. Nobody gets stuck.
That's right. That's right. That's the myth, right? That I'll go in there and I'll get stuck. You know, that makes me think this could be a kind of creative. It would be really hard to control this, but that could be a really interesting workshop, which is where the workshop leaders are ages 1 to 4. And we're all around and we just observe them and watch how they manage emotions. And maybe we do what they do. Have you seen those ones where dancers try to imitate what, you know, young kids are doing when they're dancing? Thank you for that reminder that that part of us, that 1 to 3-year-old, if I was fortunate enough to have enough trauma-free years to be able to actually release like that, those years, those early years, we knew how to release a lot better and to move on. So thank you for that. Well, let's just take not a break. Don't go away. Don't go find the coffee and the side and the cookies and the donuts. Just stand up and move your body a little bit. I'm going to set up an audio piece that's 7 minutes long that we're going to listen to next, and stand up and stretch a little bit and have something that you can write with if you would. Okay, so let's just do about a minute. Einar, can you see the screen over on the left where it says Graceful Passages, the cover of the CD?
Yes.
Okay, great. What I would like to do is to move, since we're talking about motion and moving, let's move into talking about this amazing process of dying and the intelligence on all levels that is present in each of us. Our bodies, our beings know how to die. And there's a wonderful CD that I have used many times over the years. It's called Graceful Passages. You can see it on the screen on the left side. It's the cover of it. It's put together by musicians Gary Malkin and Michael Stillwater, and it's words of thought leaders and visionaries about the dying process from different traditions, spiritual traditions, healthcare backgrounds, a whole variety of people. And this is the one that I'd like to play, is 7 minutes long, and it's called Walk On. As you're listening, I'm going to invite you to write down any words or phrases that really stand out, jump out, are meaningful to you in what she's saying. Just write down words or phrases. Don't have to do any journaling beyond that, because I don't want you to lose touch with what she's saying and get distracted by your writing. But if there are some key words or phrases that you find compelling, just write them down if you would, okay? And hopefully we'll hear the sound, no problem. You hear it okay? Let me just try again. For some reason, the audio is having trouble. Let me just try again.
Good morning, Grandfather. I entered this life a ways back and put skin on to walk two-legged on this creation. And what a glorious time it was. It taught me about breath and about sensing and feeling and caring through my heart. And I walked on around that red road, looking and trying to understand more about the mystery and the secrets she holds. And you spoke to me through the wind. And you sang to me through the birds. And you brought challenges forth so that I might listen to the message you bring me more sincerely. And I kept walking down this road. And I came round the bend at the middle of that curve in the road, and I began to find a secret in the spirit of myself. And still I walked on. Sometimes blind and deaf, and sometimes with pain. But I fought with my fears, and I embraced my unknowingness, and still I walked on. And my children and my family stood with me. And we came to know each other in those later years more than we had before. For some of our falseness had fallen away. And still I walked on. And I kept walking on this road towards you, towards that other world that grew closer to me with each step. And as the door of the Great Spirit world came closer, my fear loomed up inside sometimes, but something called me forth. The morning star rose with each day. And my prayer became a centering. And still I walked on. Until I began to hear the song of the mother. And her arms embraced me so. Instead of walking, she carried me right to the door. And as the door opened, I heard her song. And her song lifted me up. So I could soar.
What if a few of you were to share some word or phrase that was meaningful to you in how she spoke?
I really liked everything, but so we're living our life. We're in the in between, but we have our birth, our entering life. That's what kind of stuck out. And then the end, the exit to this life. So I like how she starts out by calling the grandfather and talks about the senses and the breath, like the first thing she notices about living. She said, breath, sensing, feeling, and carrying through my heart. And then all the things about life she's experienced and learned in the transitions. And the next thing that stuck out to me was when she said prayer became my centering. And then from that point on, she started to hear the song of the mother and how just hearing that and able to release and let go. And she walked, then she was carried, and the song lifted her up to soar. So I just like that part.
I'm going to share also. Thank you. That was very powerful. All of it really hit. The big one was the falseness falling away. This journey has been so interesting. The skin. I remember thinking when I was little, the skin, putting the skin on and wondering what the hell is all about. And then believing, having beliefs. And lately, the last year or so, they have been just falling away. And I still walk the path. I love that. And I'm still walking on the path. And the centering and the release at the end. Feeling that very deeply. Because the betrayal, there's a grief there. And healing that has been a process. So, and it comes through that centering and that meditation, and releasing and releasing and releasing, and still walking on the path. It's awesome. That was so powerful. Thank you.
And thank you both for capturing.
Yeah.
Yes, Cindy.
I noticed that when the song came to the sound of the mother, her arms embraced me. So she carried me right to the door, and tears rose up, and I immediately stopped them.
Thank you for noticing that. So much of this for all of us, so much of life for that matter, but just speaking about being present to ourselves and to others at end of life, so much starts with awareness, right? What am I noticing? What am I feeling? And how can I be with that, whatever that is? So thank you for that awareness. Anyone else? Anything that was significant for you in her words, in her way of talking about a process of living and letting go?
I would like to share.
Please.
I think I love this CD, and this is probably my favorite piece on the CD. I don't know how many times I've listened to it, but it still makes me cry.
Mm-hmm.
And my new coach, Lauren Hopper, who has told us to feel. I just let the tears come. It was just beautiful. I couldn't pick out any one thing.
Mm-hmm.
each word that she speaks to me is so impressed with truth, genuine, heartfelt human experience. I can't help but just embrace all of it. So thank you.
Yes, this is a favorite of mine as well, Marcia. I share that with you. And whoever may be a guide or a model for you, notice the ways of experiencing transition and dying and letting go that inspire you and speak to you. It may be people who you are with when they're dying. It may be something like this model she puts out of how we might move through life. You know, it sounds trite sometimes to say the dying people I've worked with have been my greatest teachers, and yet for me that is true. Not every single person, although I've learned from everybody, but there's certain dying and deaths that I have been a part of that have particularly inspired me and helped me to imagine how I might in my own way do it. One of them was my father who died in such a spirit-filled and real world way. And when I hear her speak, I'm inspired in that same way. She still gives voice to fear. She gives voice to the challenges and the suffering. And she also holds up a picture where we move through that with a kind of grace and trust and belief and noticing what it is, that path that is sometimes dimly, sometimes brightly lit, and still I walk on. I love that. So this is perhaps a more poetic way of, or mythic way of speaking about the dying process. Let's talk a little bit about that. Some of you have been around a lot of deaths and seen close up. Most of us in the general North American culture, unless we work in it or volunteer in it or somehow find ourselves at bedsides of dying people, most of us see very little of it. And that's been a big change from a time when we tended to live more multi-generationally and we saw our family members, our grandparents, we were around other families where we saw dying, certainly in years when more people were living in rural areas. There were animals, they were following the seasons of crops, and just a whole understanding of the cycle of living and dying. In a fairly short time in our modern era, many of us have been cut off from some of that learning about what dying looks like. So I think it's helpful just to speak a little bit about it. I would start from the place of that intelligence, that is the intelligence of the body, in the case of, the female body knowing how to give birth. In the same way I'd say our bodies, all of our bodies know how to die. And it doesn't mean that we don't need help. And especially in a modern time when we have treated disease to a place where we're often dying from advanced disease. So that means that some of the complications that can come, for example, with pain, are intensified because we're dying at later stages in a disease. Whereas, so for example, back before we had treatments for cancers that could be cured, we didn't live until a really advanced state of that cancer. We died sooner. So there are some differences in how we die in modern times. We're, in a sense, dying sicker, if that makes sense, than we might have in the past. So, and yet, in spite of that, our bodies know how to die. And it's a very Everyone has their own way of doing it based on the particular way that the body is dying and from what, so to speak, it's dying from. But there are some real commonalities. And of course, everything I'm speaking about here is the slow death model and not sudden death. Sudden death is a whole different, that's a whole different workshop. It's a whole different understanding. But in the slow death that most of us, by statistics, will die from. So physically, what's happening? The body is shutting down, and the body knows how to shut down. So there's a change in circulation, and the hands and feet get less blood to it because they're not as crucial as the trunk of the body. So hands and feet get cooler, can get blotchy, can get mottled, which is the fancy word for the blotchy look on arms and feet and legs that can show that the circulation is no longer getting to other parts of the body. But even before that, people are moving around less. They have less energy. They're sleeping more. They're less hungry. They're not drinking as much or eating as much because the body doesn't need it. There's a wonderful, very practical example that I have used many times with people that I think can be helpful. So you have a car and you're in a time in your life when you're driving your car a lot. So you have to fill the tank with gas a lot because you're driving a lot. And then you start using the car less. And so it's sitting in the garage. It doesn't need to keep getting filled up with the same amount of gas because it's sitting in the garage, right? And then there comes a point when you're not driving at all. And it would not be good to just put the hose of the gas into the tank when it doesn't need it, right? So that one of the most challenging places for family members and friends when someone is dying is around this idea of food and drink, because of everything that it signifies in terms of someone, quote, getting better, our ability to care for someone by giving food and drink and offering them. And so this not being hungry, not being very thirsty is a very natural part of the dying process. And in fact, if we are, for many people who are dying, if we were to hook up an IV, it could actually cause a lot more problems because it's that analogy of sticking the hose into the gas tank when the car isn't moving, right? So other changes as the body is slowly unraveling and letting go, and the processes that have kept us alive for so long are loosening. So our regular breathing becomes more irregular. Our regular heart rate becomes irregular. And it's just a natural part of that system slowing down and moving towards death. Less urine output because there's less, you're taking in less. Sometimes a harder time moving stool because you're not moving around and drinking as much. Now I'm getting more probably into the hospice nursing piece than I need to, but everything is changing. It can also be the more confusion and agitation, which can have, this is probably, I would say, the second place that family members and friends can be the most challenged and upset, is around mom is so anxious and agitated. What can we do? And there are multiple reasons, and a good assessment of someone, if I was coming in as a nurse, I would be looking at what might be contributing to that. And it could be all kinds of things. It could be they're constipated. It could be they can't pee. It could be they're in pain. But it could also just as easily be that electrolytes are shifting in their brain and in their whole system as they're becoming more dehydrated. It could be equally on a more emotional or spiritual level. It could be fear. It could be I'm between worlds and I'm not sure where I am. And it's sometimes okay, but other times not okay, because I'm not sure where I am and no one is talking to me about it. I've had several very impactful conversations in my life as a hospice nurse where people have turned to me and said, am I dying? Is this what's happening? And I could feel, even in a hospice world, I could feel the pressure of my culture to want to somehow make it better. I just still remember that split second of hesitation, to be honest. But instead, thank goodness, and these were in sort of early years of being a hospice nurse, I said, yes, you are. And tell me about it. Tell me what you're experiencing. And in my experience, most people, if they have the ability to communicate, want to be able to talk about it in some way. And it's often the family and friends who, by our conditioning in the culture, no, mom, you're not dying. You're going to get better. This positivism can be pathological at that moment in the dying time, because it doesn't allow us to name what's happening and to therefore open up a whole different kind of conversation that might happen. Mom, tell me what you're experiencing, right? And exploring that. And by the way, learning from it, so that you're learning about at least this person's dying before it's your turn. And so that perpetual student in me is fascinated by that. So agitation can come from all kinds of different things, and it doesn't need to be instantly medicated. That doesn't mean that there isn't medication at times that can't be very helpful. But just as in our culture, for a variety of reasons, to put it simply, we struggle with knowing what to do with suffering and pain. And we numb, distract, medicate, because we don't know what to do with it. We haven't been taught to be with it. And that doesn't mean that we just let people be agitated and we all just sit around and be with it. There may be a place for that. Many times it's helpful just to be with, present, compassionate, connected to someone when they're agitated and confused. And that can be the best thing to offer. And there may be times when it might be helpful to also be medicated. So emotionally, what is happening? That withdrawal is a very natural process, going from being fully active in my life to more and more over the years, pulling back, my world getting smaller and smaller around me, withdrawing more from people where I have the energy only for the people who are most important to me, right? And so that emotional withdrawing and going more interiorly is a natural loosening of that part of my life. Because imagine what it takes for us to incarnate, and how many of us still struggle with incarnating at different times and really being here, right? Yeah. So imagine what it takes to let go. We're losing this person in front of us, but that person is letting go and losing everyone in their life, letting go of every role they have played, every hobby, every meaningful pursuit, every love of food and wine and the smelling of lilacs and music. They're letting go of every bit of that. So it's only natural in the intelligence of how we let go that there's going to be a withdrawing from that world and going into a different world, which is the interior world, however you conceive of that, the world of spirit, the world of consciousness, the inner interiority. So that can be very painful for people. That would be, I'd say, a third place where people really struggle, who are the loved ones of someone who is dying, which is losing that connection. She's not talking anymore. You're giving her too many medications. Why can't she talk more? I mean, I can just hear all these voices of people who have struggled at that point with the reality that I may not have another conversation. That may be the last time. We may learn to communicate in another way. I may now be practicing my communication of deep presence and communicating silently from the heart. That may be where we are, but there is such a loss in that, isn't there, of no longer being able to speak to someone. So our naming these things to people and helping to educate about the dying process is huge. Spiritually, there are all kinds of really fascinating things that happen that can be very moving to people who are with someone who's dying. And it is often the kind of thing that can draw people to want to work at end of life, because it's so meaningful to hear some of the symbolic language, to watch spiritually some of the what could be called in a biomedical model hallucinations, but that I choose instead to see as part of a language that is no longer part of the language of our daily, quote, normal human life that we have practiced for so many years. This is a different language. And a wonderful book is used a lot in hospices and recommended often to families. It was written by two hospice nurses who actually happened to be two of my mentors in hospice in Northern Virginia. Pat Kelly and Maggie Callanan wrote a book called Final Gifts back in, I think in the 80s. And it was one of the first books for lay people that really gave voice to the symbolic language that we can see differently, not just as confusion and hallucinating, but as a language. It's almost like poetry. It's a different way of conceiving of things. It's different wording. And often there are two main ways that you hear people. One is people talking about a journey or a trip. I've got to get packed. I've got to get my suitcase. I'm not ready. I'm meeting someone at the station, all kinds of travel analogies, but sometimes a kind of agitation around I've got to get packed. And a second one is also very common, and that is speaking of home. I have to get home. I have to meet someone at home. And there can be agitation to it. There can be calm to it. It can be both, but both of those seem to be very potent experiences of both travel and home. Well, how interesting, right? How interesting that those are two analogies that would come up. So we have a choice ourselves, if we're with someone who's dying, or if we're supporting the family and friends. We have a choice to be, when that kind of language comes up, we can help to inform, normalize, educate people about what a natural part of the process this seems to be, and it is a real mystery. It's entering into this veiled period between the worlds that some of us have more understanding of than others. And I've seen many people shift into a whole different experience of this when it is normalized. So it doesn't seem scary. It doesn't seem like mom's on too many meds, but instead is people are invited to imagine it as part of a spiritual journey, preparing to move into a very different world. So, often people will talk about, we'll see people who've died before, my husband is up there in the corner of the room. For some reason, it's in my experience, I'm not sure why this is, but often it's people near the bed, sitting on the bed, or people up in a corner of the room, and how easily that could be called a hallucination, right? I don't know. I don't pretend to know until it's my time, and then I'll only know what I know then. But how wonderful this possibility. So the invitation here, I would say, for any of you who are particularly interested in this, or you're already studying it and you want to go deeper, is to look to what we know, if you can call this the spiritual science of near-death experiences, of nearing death awareness, which is the official end-of-life professional designation, NDA, nearing death awareness, which is seeing things other people aren't seeing, using symbolic language. And then the study of near-death experiences and the commonalities in what people experience there. That's science for us, if you want to call it science. That's research. That's worthy of study, since we won't know until it's our time. And I encourage you to take some dives into that, to start to get more facility with how to talk about this with people and meet them where they are in their own understanding of it. So one of the things that we are seeing with COVID, and it's not brand new, but there's just a lot more of it, is that we're needing to find ways to encourage people to communicate when they can't physically be with someone. And there's a story that Marcia told me that I would love for her to share, that is a wonderful example of ways that we can collectively be together when we can't physically be together, and ways that we can honor an imaginative spiritual understanding of supporting someone to move on and let go. Marcia, would you be willing to share that story?
I would love to, and I would also invite Melinda if she wants to add anything. Melinda, we're part of this story, very much a part, because I'm going to talk about Terrell Lundquist's passing, okay? And Terrell is a friend of ours, and probably some of you as well, from Colorado Springs, who died May 24th of this year. And so she had chosen to have as conscious a death as possible. She'd come to the conferences, read the books, and said, this is how I want to do it once she got her diagnosis that her death was coming up. And so she put into place many wonderful things like who I want to be at my bedside because I want to die at home. And she had so many friends and loved ones who wanted to step forward and assist. And so many of the things that she wanted were able to be put in place because everybody had her list. Everybody knew. So the piece that I want to talk about is probably what happened maybe a week prior to her passing. I think it was maybe after what Melinda did for her. I'm not sure, Melinda. So both of us, so I live in Pueblo, Terrell was in Colorado Springs, Melinda had moved at that point to Pennsylvania. But both of us were part of her support team. But there were people on the ground, day to day to day, caregivers. And we were having a conference call organized by Ann Porter, who was one of the organizers of her care. And the caregivers were on the call in wherever they were in Colorado Springs, and I was in Pueblo. So right away, we're starting to organize, even though we can't all be there. And they felt like they were each coming at it from a different point of view or from in a different way. How can we all be on the same page in terms of what we're saying to Terrell, the way we're supporting her, the way we're coaching her? And so what we did in that phone call was we put together a guided meditation using Terrell's poetic nature, using the things that she loved to be a part of her meditation to guide her to the other side. She loved to swim in the lake. She loved to hike all over, particularly Pikes Peak. Her love of nature and so forth. So we wove this in to the guided meditation that everybody built together, and then we were all hearing each other build it. Therefore, we were all on the same page as to how to present it. So the guided meditation basically is what we all know with guided meditation, the relaxation, the quiet music whenever possible. And the idea that she was on a journey. So here's your thing that you're mentioning, Jan, that you're on a journey now to the other side. And we included the whole idea of hiking Pikes Peak, step by step getting to your goal. And there's a lake. If you want to swim in the lake, you can hear the water, you can smell the breeze, you can see the beautiful colors and all of this sort of thing, which gives the one who's very inward a direction to take their thoughts. And so step by step, making it up the mountain, seeing what you see now, you see more clearly, or now you see ahead of you the light. So we did that guided imagery. And later, I talked, one of the women who worked with her, who I did not know, but who was one of her caregivers, came to me and said, you know, that was so helpful because we felt like we knew what to say to her, that we were all saying the same thing. Now, people could be with Terrell in person. Loved ones could be with her because she chose to die at home. So I love to share this because who knows who might be having someone who's dying in a facility. But if everyone in the family and maybe a few people in the facility are in on the same words, the same imagery, the same coaching, wouldn't that be cool? Because again, we're offering a comfortable, safe, familiar environment for the person. So I'm going to stop that story, but I have one more just to add on this with the power of imagery that we all can give. One of my friends shared with me the story of her mother dying, and her brother was able to be with the mom in the hospital, but mom was hugely agitated and upset, and nobody could quite help her with her pain and her agitation. And so her son said, Mom, is there a really beautiful place that you and Dad used to go? And Mom stopped her agitation and she said, yeah, that cabin in the mountains or in the woods or whatever it was, I don't remember. And the son said to her, Mom, go there. Be there. See it, feel it. Remember how happy you were in that place. Maybe Dad's there. He'd already passed. And she calmed down immediately. It gave her a tool to work with her agitation. So I'm really a newbie at this, but I think the power of guided meditation and guided imagery, especially if it's shared with a group of caregivers, can be really powerful. Melinda was in on that, though. If we have a few more minutes, Jan, for
Sure.
Melinda to share. So Melinda was in on it because Melinda was Terrell's brother's doula and then volunteered to be helpful in whatever way she could with Terrell. So you want to share, Melinda, whatever you want to add to this story?
Sure. So it was my first experience doula by distance, and I was able to be in touch with the caregivers because I had heard from Marcia that Terrell was declining, and I wanted to speak with her, and I was blessed to be able to have that conversation between periods where Terrell was coherent. And Terrell and I and her brother, I also came in as an energy practitioner and supported their energy systems as they were approaching end of life. And it was one thing that Terrell requested, and unfortunately I wasn't able to do it in person, but I was able to actually voice guide a treatment over the phone with her, and it was glorious, as Marcia mentioned, to have someone in the facility, in her room, that could hold her hand and have the physical touch while we had the phone up. And it was, Carol was a teacher, a yoga teacher, just a wisdom teacher. She taught me so much in the short period I knew her. And as I was beginning this voice guided meditation to kind of expand her energy system, because she was familiar with that, and I was trying to create what she termed her soul sanctuary. So I was trying to recreate and create this, but needed the help with the caregivers. And so they were, I believe one had, I don't know who had the cell phone, but somebody held Terrell's hand. And then I asked them to put their hand on her heart. And so it was just a collaboration of just everyone, my voice, someone's touch, Terrell needing to teach in her dying moments. I mean, it was just, so, you know, it's just amazing to be a part of that. I didn't know I could do that work long distance as a doula. And it's just a blessing to be able to, when I got the call from a couple of days later, Terrell was very agitated, and I had to remind everyone Terrell wanted her soul sanctuary, which was quiet. She didn't like music when we did treatments together. She just wanted it quiet. I helped everyone to whisper when they come into the room, and, you know, and at that time, it was important to reach out to the hospice people to see if medication would be of benefit to her as she went towards that inward soul journey. It was just a lovely blessing to be able to voice guide her. I work in a particular system we call the HARA, which I got to speak at one of the conferences a couple years ago, where I have worked with the energy and found that the HARA is the transport system of the soul. And so when I was able to voice guide Terrell through this process, which we had done before, the feedback I got was how just calm she became. And just after that, she became quiet. So I'll tell you, it takes a team. It takes a team. And it was just, I was so blessed to be able to be a part of that, and to be able to, you know, talk to her in her last days and stuff. So
Thank you, Melinda. Did I give you forewarning on this? I can't remember.
You know, sort of, but I was a little shocked. I was hoping you were going to tee it up where I'm like, okay, I can plug in here.
No, that's great, both
Good,
of you. Thank you so much for sharing that. And there are three, I mean, there's many things that jumped out at me in that story, but I want to use three things. One of them is how important it was that you knew, is it Terrell?
Carol. Mm-hmm.
Knew Terrell enough to use metaphors and journeys that were specific to her and meaningful to her. So that involves thinking about the person in front of us and not having any kind of cookie cutter approach, but also ideally being able to have conversations ahead of time with someone about what would be meaningful. And those conversations so often don't happen because we're afraid to have them, because to have them means we're acknowledging that you're dying. And the trouble is, when we don't have them, the dying process picks up speed and people are no longer able to communicate, or they're too fatigued, or they're confused, or they're agitated, or they're sleeping all the time. So, you know, the importance of ideally long before we get to the dying process, being able to have conversations about what would be for you helpful. The second thing that I heard was the creativity and the willingness to think outside the box. How can we do this over a phone with using the person who's at the bedside? And that's an area we're going to have to really, we are all now scrambling to understand more. Scrambling is probably not the right word. It's just that it's pretty intense because this is new territory and it's really needed right now in a time of COVID. So I really encourage you to dare to have courage to think creatively outside of the box, even if it's something that has never been done before, as a way to facilitate real authentic communication, and use the people who are there, which may be, nursing assistants in a long-term care facility. It may be someone at the bedside who you never met before. This is your dear friend, but you can't be with them, and that you don't know the person at the bedside. So you're going to have to skillfully, figure that out. And the third thing that I heard in that story is, oh my gosh, it just went right out of my head. Oh well. It was good, darn it, it'll come back. But it was a third thing that I really heard.
Was it the team?
No, but that's a good one. That's a good one. The team working together. Darn. I don't know.
Is it not having to be there physically?
Right. Yeah. I don't know what it was.
Can I say something?
I had already given word to that, and it makes me think of, I was, one of my nurse colleagues called me, this was before COVID, but she couldn't be with her mom. It wasn't right at the time of dying, but her mom's condition was rapidly changing and she was afraid she wouldn't get there in time. She was in Seattle and she had to get down to Portland, Oregon. And she called me and she said, she has a nursing assistant with her, a private hire, but I don't know what to say to her, but I really want her to help my mom right now. And do you have any ideas? And one thing that just came up, I just knew a little bit about her mom, and that she had been raised Catholic. And so thank God for intuition, just something came up and I said, you might want to take, if there's an essential oil near your mom's bed or something like that, guide this nursing assistant through a kind of anointing, which would have been meaningful to her as a Catholic, but which could be meaningful to anybody. And you think about the simplicity of the ritual. It's putting something, it could be water, it could be essential oil, it could just be your hand on different parts of the body and blessing them. You know how we did with the hands, but a much shorter version, right? Blessings on this mind that was such an important part of her life, and blessings on this face, and going through different parts of the body, the heart, these hands, this stomach that birthed 5 children, this abdomen, the legs that carried her climbing in the Alps in Europe and down to the feet, and a kind of anointing. And it was just perfect. It was just right for everybody. And it was so simple. So that kind of imagination that we can use to help to bring ritual and share ritual for people who might not have thought of it, might feel uncomfortable around it. This nursing assistant might not have known to do that or thought to do that or felt permission to do it. But all of us working together what we're doing is it's like we're stepping into a different kind of confidence. Like, it's okay to talk about this. It's okay to name that you are dying. It's okay to create rituals that encourage you at this point to be leaving your body and to be leaving in peace. And those are countercultural at this point in our American dying. Those are countercultural, to name it and to encourage it. So I love that story. I'm just looking at the time, and let's take this moment, bathed in that beautiful story, to take a 5-minute break, move around, go to the bathroom, get a breath of fresh air, get something to eat or drink, and let's come back in 5 minutes for the last part of our time together, which will start with some small group conversation. And the focus of this last hour is where do each of you go from here? What is yours to do next? And let's start talking about that in some practical ways and in some creative ways about where you go from here. Okay, so let's take 5 minutes. It's what time is it officially? It's 2:58. How's that for a 3 p.m. break? And let's be back ready to go at 5 after, okay? 5 after the hour, whatever the hour is for you.
Can I say something real quick?
Oh, definitely.
I just shared, I was very inspired by the story Marcia and others told. And I just shared a link from KKTV, which is a local TV station. When they interviewed me about a time when, because of COVID and so on, it's a little more complicated than that, but because of COVID, a family couldn't be in the room with this loved one, and a nurse and I sat and were in the room with this COVID patient and connected them via phone, the whole family in several different places. And so it might be of interest as we think about rituals and connection when we can't be physically present with somebody. It's a short video, interview, 3 minutes or something. But yeah, I just put it up there just to show another example of when somebody was both physically touched and loved, but not by their family members, but they were connected and praying with her and talking with her on the phone. So just FYI.
I'm so glad you put that link on there, Roger. Thank you. Because these are the kinds of things, Marcia and Melinda's stories, Roger's link there, and there are many others that we can be learning from in this time. I mean, certainly pre-COVID, there are many examples also, but because we're being challenged in new ways, there's a lot of creativity happening right now. And it might be very interesting for you to talk with people in your area. Well, for that matter, virtually you can talk to people anywhere, but people who are living this right now as end-of-life professionals or supporters of people at end of life, and what are they finding? To ask them, what are you finding creative ways to connect people, to help people to feel that they are with someone who's dying? What are things that people can do? Whether it's through the funeral industry or grief counselors or hospice and palliative care workers or energy workers, all kinds of people we're in a pretty highly creative time right now out of necessity.
I have a question, Jen.
Yeah.
I have a pretty extensive hospice background, mainly directing volunteers and volunteering myself when I was in Colorado. And maybe I need help with the elevator speech when I am trying to bring this end-of-life doula awareness to the hospice. And it's getting old where I see the whites of their eyes, or they've got no engagement in the conversation, and I'm perplexed on how to bridge this gap between this divine work that we do as doulas and where hospice is having a challenge embracing the vocation and kind of understanding how we can be another layer of care. And I don't know what to say anymore. If you had any suggestions.
I do. I'm just hesitating whether I'm going to say them now or maybe after you all do this next part. I think I might say it afterwards. Melinda, thank you for asking the question.
Sure.
Because this next part has to do with you all working together on your vision for yourselves and the concrete form it may take, and what your next steps for that would be. And it sounds like this for you may be a piece of your next step. It's a really important conversation, and I'm glad you brought it up. In fact, I'm giving what was going to be a pre-conference lectureship I'm now doing online for the Minnesota Network of Hospice and Palliative Care. And I'm very intentionally talking about how I have a foot in the hospice palliative care world and a foot in the doula world, and what I'm seeing and learning from both, and how we can bring the wisdom and the fresh perspective, the wisdom and decades of work from the hospice palliative world, and the best of the new fresh perspective of doulas who are thinking differently and acting differently, and how we are stronger together. You know, like we said yesterday, what was the disruptor is now the mainstream, and the new disruptor coming in is not always welcomed. And so we need to make alliances and be able to speak in a way that helps people to see that this is just the next evolution of bringing this into the community even deeper. So I'll talk just a little bit more about that after you all do this next part. So this last hour is a bridge between what we've been talking about the previous 5 hours, and you're moving on from this course back out into your life, and hoping that there is the beginning of some roots that are starting to take place in your confidence and your inspiration to move further into showing up as one of these new voices in end-of-life care. So there are two things that I'm going to invite you to do. One is after today, after we're done, I strongly invite you to work with one of the conversation opening documents that I'm going to send you after this course is done. There are a variety of interesting documents that can help you and other people to start conversations about what matters most to people in the last parts of their lives. It's like a much more full-bodied advanced directives. Some of them are from places like the Conversation Project. Some of them are 5 wishes. One is a listing of all the different states and all the different advanced directives. Some of them are card games that can be played that help people to speak more easily about what matters to them. So I'm really strongly inviting you to, first of all, make sure that you have advanced directives in place, but more importantly, that you speak with and have as robust a conversation you can with the person who you are designating to speak for you. You know, the advanced directives are made of 2 parts. One is the designation of the medical power of attorney. If you're not able to speak for yourself, who speaks for you? The second part is the living will, where you, in a variety of ways, either very simple or very complex, you get to say, this is what matters to me. At this point, I no longer want this kind of life-sustaining treatment. And you can go into all kinds of details about that. So I would strongly encourage you to, if you haven't completed advanced directives at any age, to do it now. If you've already done it, to have a robust conversation with a person or persons who will be speaking for you. Because that's one of the, if we're lucky enough to get maybe 30% of Americans to fill out advanced directives, the number of that group who have actually talked with their power of attorney is an even smaller group. So often I have heard from people over the years, I still hear it, oh, my daughter has that, or oh, my doctor has that, that's in a file somewhere. But it's the understanding around that piece of paper that is the most important. Like we talked about yesterday, it's the gray area of values and beliefs and what matters to you. So that's an invitation to ongoing homework after this course. And then the second thing is what we're going to talk about next, and that is in terms of where you go from here, not just for yourself and your own wishes being clearly talked about and put on paper, but the wishes for your work, of how you want to be of service as a community member, as someone who is a safe place to open conversations about death and dying, or a safe place to hear people speak of their grief and losses, a safe place to be someone who sits with people who are dying, however, whatever shape that takes for you. What that starts with is being able to envision what it is that I want. And what are some practical steps to move me forward? What are the things that I need to learn, to do, to reflect on, to be able to move forward? So I'm going to have you go into groups. I think we'll do groups of 4. I think that's what we said already, Angelina. We'll do groups of 4. And we'll go for 20 minutes. And each of you will have 5 minutes. So somebody time so that that last person doesn't get cheated out of their time. Okay, 5 minutes a person. And you can use your 5 minutes however you want. You can talk about what it is that you want to do, and I'll give you 4 questions that might be helpful. Talk about what you want to do and ask for input, or you can just talk about it and explore, and just use that time to see what happens when you have 3 people who are really listening well to you, and just to hear what comes out. So that 5 minutes is for you to use however you want. Often in a group, there's a synergy that can help you to envision differently. And some people do well by engaging in conversation and asking questions and looking for feedback. And some people just want to use that time to speak. All right. And the 4 questions that I would encourage you to focus on: what is your vision at this point? Knowing it could change. What is your vision for yourself in this work? However you conceive of it. What is your vision for yourself? And the second is, what concrete practical forms might it take? The third would be, what would be your next steps? Let's say your next 1 to 3 steps. Because remember, this is often where our visions get lost, is because we don't know how to do those simple steps forward that build on each other to move us towards it. So what would be my next steps to move towards that concrete form? And then the last question is, how do you move forward in the time of COVID? Like what you want to be able to do, what is that going to look like in the time of COVID, and what's possible as things are now? So envisioning what concrete forms might it take, what would be my next steps, and what of that is possible now, even in a time of COVID. And that keeps us from saying, well, I'd love to do that, and I have this great idea, but I can't do it now, so forget it. Okay. Does that make sense? Those 4? So 5 minutes each. Use that 5 minutes however you want.
Got a question really quick.
Yeah.
So I'm creating the rooms, and there's a little shift from today than yesterday, and I have 1 person extra, so I have all the rooms at 4, but 1 room might need 5, or would you rather? Is that okay?
Yep, that's fine. And in the group of 5, you'll have 4 minutes instead of 5 minutes. See how good I am at math?
Yeah. All
Public
right.
school math.
Okay, so hold on to your seats. It's transporter time. We're going 20 minutes. Let me know if you have any questions. No problem.
Thank you, Angelina. We'll see you back soon. Welcome back. I think everybody's back. I hope there's some things that came out for you of some clarifying, or at least seeing a little bit on the path ahead to know where it is you want to go to further clarify. or further explore or increase your skills or capacity. Any questions that came out of that? We have we'll take about 5 minutes or so for any questions either that came out of that or any questions that might have come from anything we've talked about today before we move towards the closing of our time together.
I do, Jan. This is Tracy. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you, Tracy.
Okay, great. I asked this in the group, and then I have asked this before, but can you give me your definition or your perspective on the word doula for me? Like what you're embracing it as, what it is from your perspective?
Most people know of a birth doula, which is a traditional role that has been brought into this country as an assistant and support to a woman in labor, and a role that supports the healthcare system around it, but is separate from that. So the people who came up with the idea, and it was probably Henry Frisco Weiss, I think, and some of the early end-of-life doulas thought, why don't we name it that? Because we already have some sense of someone who is there as a support uniquely for the person in labor, and here uniquely support for the person who's dying or their family. So it has both a new role definition and it speaks to an old role that's been there probably in many societies for a long time. And it's confusing to most people who don't understand what it is, as it might have been for any of us the first time we heard it, right? There are a lot of different ways that people are naming themselves in this emerging new leadership in end-of-life care, much of it coming from lay people, not clinical people. Doula is one, midwife is another that's often used. A death midwife. I'm blanking on some of the other names that people call themselves, but it's sort of at this point the kind of best we have that speaks to both the old role and a new way of envisioning it in the end-of-life care support team.
Oh, okay. I was just kind of curious because I've delivered 24 babies and I've transitioned numerous, but the word doula doesn't resonate to me. So I guess wanted to get your opinion on that. You know.
Well, I'd say what's most important about that, Tracy, is that it doesn't resonate to you, so you get to find another word or phrase to describe what you do. I know some people who call themselves lifespan doulas, or who are both birth doulas and death doulas, and call themselves transition doulas or full spectrum life and death doulas. But I would just encourage you to spend some time creatively with what is at the heart of what you do and what you offer and what you feel you uniquely bring into this, and just see what kinds of words come up for you, because there is no reason to have to claim this. There is no standardization right now for doulas, for end-of-life doulas. There are some attempts at it just to get a kind of baseline. There are some ethics. I'll be including that on the resources that I give you all, so that you can see through, for example, the End-of-Life Doula Alliance, through the National End-of-Life Doula Alliance, right? But also through NHPCO, the National Council of Hospice and Palliative Care, have come together with some of the leaders of the death doula movement to come up with some basic information documents that can be shared. And this is something that might be helpful for who was it that asked me about working? I think it was Melinda, about working with hospices as a way, particularly when talking to hospices, because this was a joint collaboration, it's a way of legitimizing the work, normalizing the work that we do in these new roles, because of the documents that have been created to say, hey, this is a thing, we want to work together. And you'll see the links if any of you are interested in looking at that.
Yeah, Jan, I'd love to piggyback on that because I actually was invited to apply for the end of life committee that reports to the NHPCO. And I wasn't a member yet. It's quite expensive if you're an organization. I had to dig to find an independent. So I did that, but it takes 2 weeks. So I missed it, unfortunately, because I wanted to be on that cusp of being able to report certainly what I'm finding. And I want to kind of tag on Tracy. I know we're educators. We have to go out there and help people to not be afraid of death and dying, but the word death scares everybody. I wish there was some other way to bring this beautiful work without using death. And I know that's not, it doesn't, I'm an educator, I'm an instructor. I know that my job is to instruct and help people to know that this is nothing to be afraid of, but that word scares everybody. And I will go deep like Tracy and find what's going to resonate with me that I can just be able to shout to the heavens the sacredness of this work. And my father is my biggest lesson. He'll cut out a right lung to stay one more day on this planet. And so, you know, I can't talk death to them. And so I sit here just observing how I can language without scaring people or without that fear. You know, death is like, it takes people's breath away.
Yeah.
And so I too, Tracy, will be searching for some other languaging as well. Thanks.
And I really encourage you to do that, to find language that matches not just what you're doing, but matches our times. And I will also say, as someone who's been doing this work for 35, 36 years, I feel like I'm running up against the same things. People didn't want to hear the word hospice. Then they didn't want to hear the word palliative care. You know, it's just what we have to work with.
Yeah.
Right.
And so it just takes enormous creativity on our parts, because the taboo is so strong and the fear of even talking about it is so strong. So I know I find myself using the word transitions more especially when I'm talking to people earlier on in opening up conversations. So that would be another phrase: transitions in life and the tools to help us move through the transitions in life. I also talk a lot about opening conversations that are hard to talk about because of the way it impacts how fully we live, and putting the emphasis on what we've learned. Because, you know, those of us who are spending more time at end of life and have had this wonderful opportunity to do research and study and learn from others, we have something to share, and it's worthy of sharing. And I'd say one of the key things, I think I may have said this earlier today, is that one of the biggest things I've learned is that by talking about dying and death and mortality, my experience is that we live more with more awareness, more ability to be present. We live based more on our priorities. We're willing to take chances and find courage to change things that aren't working, to shift, to go after well-being when we remember that. And that's, you know, I've probably said it a million times in my life, and some people that's helpful, and some people it gets them thinking, and there are plenty of people who just glaze over, and that's okay. That's okay. That's what it means to be a pioneer.
Mm-hmm. And I wanted to
And
add,
the reason why I was asking is because I've lost a lot of friends, so I seem to have friended the one funeral home that I would just suggest people to. But the funeral director had said to me, "You don't understand the gift that you have." Like, he felt like I minimized my skills. And he said, "These families are lost and you're their pillar of strength." And he said, "You need to market yourself as a transition coach."
Mhm.
And I thought, that could be very ambiguous. Like,
Mhm.
and Lola, I liked what you just said too about spirit companion or companion spirit. It went off my screen, but it is about transitioning. I mean, even like you said, it's even about when I was in there delivering babies, and I was like, okay, well, I guess I can do this. And I just took it, and 24 babies later. But I mean, that's transitioning from the womb to life. I mean,
Right.
they're obviously alive, but so I was just getting other people's perspective. I really don't want to be in a box with the old doula beliefs, if that makes any sense.
So I think whether you have a name that has the word death or end of life in it, or you have a creative name that is using new languaging, my experience is we're still going to run into confusion about what we do, apprehension about opening the conversation, even if you call yourself, and I play, I have a variety of things as a nurse and a coach and an end of life guide, nurse, coach, doula. I mean, I've tried all kinds of different things. And I'm just saying from my own experience, it doesn't take long to get into that confusing territory. What do you do? What do you, we just have to be willing to, and I know you all know this who've been doing this kind of work, we just have to be willing to calmly, with a certain lightness, not being too attached to how well someone gets what we're trying to say or wants what we have to offer. We just have to keep moving forward, walking on in confidence that what we're bringing matters. And we just do it one person at a time. And it's hard to market that. It's hard to name it. Like anything that's relatively new, often it spreads by word of mouth. How did we first get people in the US to start believing that acupuncture was a thing that was legit, or healing modalities of kinds that were new to people? It was one person at a time, something making a difference, and them saying, you really should check this out. And that's, I think, how we're going to be a part of this tipping point. It's like a huge ocean liner just trying to turn it. It's so profound how stuck we are in the fear of dying and stuck we are in the biomedical model that to talk about death is bad and scary and showing that we're giving up hope. And this just complete, I think it's absurd at its base that we don't talk about something every single one of us is going to do.
Exactly.
Thank you.
So
I wanted to say in our group, this might serve a little bit of the end to help. It was suggested maybe do podcasts or educational like YouTube things. And I was thinking I would love that resource. My focus is trauma. I have a very specific focus. Do I run into death? You bet I do. With clients on my caseload, I'm now starting a job with addicts and alcoholics. And I said, and it's just the reality, it's not if, it's when, so I would love some place to go where I could educate myself, a resource of names. I could say, hey, I need to call this person and find out how to best help. How can I help this family, this person transition? Even staff with the state hospital where I work, they have their rituals, they have their way they do it. One doctor one time recommended I go to talk to a patient about his dying, and he had it all handled. He was fine. He talked with his family. So it was like, okay, what do I do next? So I didn't have the skills back then that I do now. However, I would like more it. So I'd love to have resources for that, especially
Well, one of the resources that I'll have on this list is End of Life University. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Karen Wyatt, who's a physician, hospice palliative care physician, who has gone into this direction of being an incredibly generous sharer of all kinds of information. And you'll see when I give you the link to EOL University, End of Life. She has interviewed all kinds of people from all kinds of backgrounds who are part of the new wave of end of life. And she shares so generously the resources that she has. And it's a great place to go to listen to interviews. You know, in this day and age, podcasts, especially, well, podcasts are, and telling stories are a great way to open a conversation. You know, think of the story that Marcia and then Melinda added to, you know, that Marcia told today. You know, that can often bypass the chattery, death-denying mind, because it's touching on what really happened in that story, the way the group came together, the imagination to come up with something that was so right for this person, and this uplifting example of how a group could support someone to end, you know, to have a different end of life. And stories are incredible because, you know, you can tell stories of when things didn't go well and how painful it was for a family, and the after effects for grief and guilt and shame and all kinds of things when no one talks about it and everything's chaotic. And then you have a story of when healing moments and surprises and unexpected things, many of the things, if not everything, that you all shared when we talked about grief. I mean, every one of your stories to me was important and profound. And I would love to share that 40-minute period or whatever it was, you know, in a podcast with the world to say, look, when we look at, dive into, reflect on, share what we've learned, listen to what these humans said. So story is a great way. Bring in people, you know, if it's a podcast or, you know, you're in the community library having a death cafe kind of thing, or you're, you know, call it what you want that'll get people there. But it's basically sharing someone's experience that was life-changing. And that will get to people more than any fancy words I might use about how important it is to, everyone turns off if you start talking too much about how important it is. Anyway, let me end there so that we have time to have some final closing from Marcia. But I will, I just made notes to add a couple of things that aren't on the list that I was going to send you all, so add a couple other things. And you have those readings also that were sent out. Those are wonderful things to share with other people as well. They're fairly short, and each one of them has kind of a different way that they might appeal to someone. The Living Every Minute article, the What It Means to Hold Space article, and then the Ram Dass's article. And Grief Walker is it's a great conversation opener. You know, watch it with other people and then talk about it. It's very poetic and gorgeously filmed. Quite a good conversation starter. So let me end there, and thank you all so much for 6 hours on a beautiful weekend that you've committed your time here, and I bow to that. Everything we've talked about, you know how rare it is to have a group of people who willingly, especially sit inside for 6 hours on a weekend to be together. And I am so touched by everything that's been shared here. And I deeply appreciate your engagement, and also very much appreciate the opportunity to be here, starting with Marcia and supported by the whole organization. So many, many thanks to all of you.
Jen, we are so happy. We are so pleased that you have come and have shared with us all that you've shared. There are no words. This has been a wonderful community that we have built. It is an inspiration what we can do despite COVID or because of COVID, to find each other in this way. Okay, we are not limited by time or space. We can gather from all over and come together. So thank you so much. Let's just all, however we want to do, thank you to Jan. Thank you so much. This has been
very welcome.
Lovely, lovely. So I don't know, Jan, if you want to say anything more about, for those who might want to do doula training, do you want to say anything more about the training that you're doing?
Yeah, there are a variety of death doula, end of life doula programs that are out there. There's a real spectrum in terms of the amount of time you would need to commit to it. The one that I happen to work with is called the Conscious Dying Institute, and in fact, Sandra is a student in that, as she said the other day, as of about a month ago. And the Conscious Dying Institute, I would say, puts maybe a little bigger emphasis than some other programs on the spiritual evolution, growth, transition, consciousness piece of the work that we're doing, but also covers all kinds of other things, and involves also, the first part of it is using a coaching tool called the Best 3 Months that is a way to work with people to open conversations about what matters most to them, and is a great tool. I call it a life coaching tool because it can be life-changing in terms of reminding people what really matters most to them. But look around, there are all kinds of doula programs there that will give you more than what just a short planting of seeds like this weekend can do, if you want to have more grounding in that kind of training.
And Jan, you haven't even mentioned your book, which is very, very good.
Oh, thank you, Sandra.
Yeah, very.
That came out of studies of being fascinated with this emerging new disruptive, wonderful cultural tipping point. And it's called Reimagining the End of Life. And it's focused on what we can do to, what some of what you've been doing this weekend, which is making an assessment of what are my beliefs, what keeps me from being able to show up with other people, what are resources that I can draw from, and has a big emphasis both on sharing what's happening in the end of life movement right now, but also how we got here and what some of the new possibilities are.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you for bringing that up. We appreciate that. So I don't know, Einar, if it's possible to put on the contact information again on our chat room or not. We want you to feel like you can be connected to us. So we want you to have Jan's email and her phone number, my email and my phone number. And another opportunity I would invite you to is if you want to be in a part of our conscious community gathering, which is once a month on the first Sunday of the month from 1:30 to 3. We do Zoom meetings. We'd love to have you on our mailing list. And you can let me know. You will automatically be put on the Southern Colorado Conference on Conscious Living and Dying mailing list as a result of participating in today. Many of you already are, but some of you aren't. So you will be getting newsletters from us now and then on our events. So I have a few other announcements and then we'll do our official closing. There's a number of you who want to have certificates of attendance today. And for those of you who paid for that, you will be getting those in the mail from me. I will send them to you as a document that you can print off if you like. We hope to send a group email to you with the recording as well as anything else that we want to add in there. And that may be a way in which Jan also will want to add her information. We'll see. We'll be talking with her about that. One other thing that I noticed that just came in on my emails is a global Death Doula Summit. And it is coming up October 12 through 18. It's online. It's actually free. It's a number of people who are sharing their death doula work or skills or questions, solutions. So you might want to look that up, Global Death Doula Summit, and see if that works for you. The chat room will stay open for a few minutes after we close. If you have anything more you want to add, we'd love to hear from you to say what worked for you, what you would like more of, and so forth. I may send out a evaluation. I think that's what I'll do. I'll send an evaluation with email. So be looking for your emails, okay? All right, so let's just close. Let's close with bringing our hearts and minds together again. Taking that deep breath. And I would like to read a prayer as we close today. This is called Earth Graduation Prayer. Beautiful Earth, may we embrace the halls of learning you provide. May we honor the delicate balance that is your lifeblood and our own. May we walk lightly through your forests. May we bless your many waters. May we touch all your beings with kindness. May we then return to the cosmos, holding as divine this priceless human sojourn. And so it is. So it is. Thank you all. We love you all. It's been wonderful to have you. Go in blessings. Blessed be.
Thank you, Marcia. Thank you, Jan.
Never know quite how to close these, but we're done.